galaxy on the edge of war, 42 alien species demand blood for the destruction of their worlds. But just as the final vote is cast, one human rises, calm, quiet, and holding a secret that could save them all, or doom them faster than any enemy. He doesn't raise a weapon. He speaks just 12 words. You've already lost the war. You just don't know it yet. What follows is a truth no one is ready to hear. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful. The Ember Hall blazed with false fire, tall columns of light dancing in glass towers that circled the great round chamber. Though the flames gave off no real heat, the air felt heavy, as if the weight of anger and fear pressed down on everyone inside. Leaders from 42 alien species had gathered there, each of them tense, their voices raised and overlapping in a roar of grief and fury. Holograms floated above the central table, images of burned cities, drifting wreckage in space, and hollow-eyed survivors staring into nothing. The Silicarn swarm had attacked again, this time without warning, and they had left nothing behind but silence. The Council, once a symbol of unity, now seemed on the edge of breaking. The High Warden of Varkani, Relics, pounded his stone fist into the table. His molten eyes burned like the towers around him. "They are not conquerors," he shouted. "They are erasers. They take, they leave, and they do not speak." Others followed, shouting their pain into the storm. "They took our dreams," growled a shadowed creature from the Moonfold realms. "They erased our kin," sobbed a silver-feathered envoy from the cloud rings. One by one, the leaders of distant stars called for war, for vengeance, for fire to answer fire. Only one seat remained untouched by the chaos, a simple chair made of dark wood and silver, placed at the edge of the circle. It belonged to the human ambassador. He had not spoken. He had not moved. He had only listened. His name was Naren Voss, and by council standards, he was young. His hair was dark, his uniform plain, and his face unreadable. No scars, no medals, no glowing implants or swirling robes. Just a man sitting still, as the galaxy unraveled around him. Vela Thorn, the council's translator and empath, stood nearby. She had heard many voices over the years, but something about Naren unsettled her. He had been calm even when others had shouted. Curious, almost. Watching, always watching, as if measuring the cracks in something everyone else believed was still. The vote began. One by one, the leaders rose from their seats and gave their answer. "We vote for war," said the Credellan matriarch, her 8 limbs shaking with rage. "War," hissed the vine-faced twins of Loma Prime. "War," echoed the thunder speakers of the Outer Veil. The sound repeated like a drumbeat, faster, louder, certain. Of 42, 37 spoke. 37 called for war. And then came silence. All eyes turned toward the last chair, toward the man who had said nothing. Naren Voss stood slowly. He placed both hands on the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. But somehow, the moment he spoke, the air shifted. "You've already lost the war," he said. The words hit the chamber like a storm. Whispers, growls, shouts, dozens of languages reacting at once. A few delegates stood, ready to argue. Some glared in disbelief. Others laughed bitterly. High Warden Relic slammed his fist again. "Explain yourself, human. We have fleets, fire, and fury." "What do you mean, lost?" Naren looked at him, then slowly around the entire room. "Because the enemy is not just in front of you," he said. "The Silicarn don't fight like you do. They don't want your land. They don't want your surrender. They want to be you, and they already are." A hush fell over the council. Even the ever-burning flames seemed quieter, casting longer shadows on the floor. "They came to Earth once," Naren continued, his voice steady. "Not as conquerors, not as warriors. They came in silence. They slipped into our systems, our thoughts, our homes. They copied what they saw, not just how we looked, but how we thought, how we felt. They became our neighbors, our lovers, our leaders, and by the time we knew what they were, It was almost too late. No one moved. No, one interrupted. They were listening now. Bela stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "What did you do?" she asked softly. "We erased them," Naren said. A gasp ran through the chamber. A metal cup clattered to the floor. One delegate nearly stumbled back from the table. "You destroyed them?" asked a voice from the edge of the circle. "Yes," Naren answered, still calm. "Not just their ships, not just their armies. We erased their history, their names, their symbols. We wiped them from every archive, every code, every spoken memory. Today no human alive knows what they were called. We made sure of that." Silence returned, thicker than before. "Because that was the only way to stop them," he added. "They weren't an enemy you could see and shoot. They were a virus that wore your face." Across the chamber, eyes began to shift. Not toward Naren, but toward each other. Questions took root where certainty had been. "You think the Silicarn are the same?" said Relic's voice low now. "I know they are," Naren replied. He stepped back, said nothing more. And yet the chamber had changed. No more shouting. No, more fire. Just silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of doubt. And in that silence, for the first time, war no longer felt like the only answer. The air in the Ember Hall remained still long after Naren Voss had finished speaking. The firelight danced quietly on the polished stone walls, but the roar of voices had died. The council members sat frozen in their chairs, unsure of what to say or how to feel. Naren had not threatened them. He hadn't shouted. He had simply told a story, one that sounded impossible and terrifying at the same time. The idea that an enemy could wear your face, take your thoughts, and walk among you. Unnoticed was not something most of them had ever imagined, but the way he spoke made it feel real. Too real. Vela Thorn hadn't moved either. She stood close to Naren now, her heart uneasy. As the council's empath, she had learned to sense truth beneath words, even when others lied. But Naren's calm wasn't fake. It wasn't forced. It was something deeper. Something old. She looked at him, studying his eyes. They weren't filled with fear or pride. They were filled with something else. Memory. From across the chamber, General Dramak of Augur rose to his feet. He was tall, thick-skinned, with scars like rivers across his face. His voice was low and rough. "You say your people fought these creatures before," he said. "You say you erased them, but you offer no proof. We have seen your records, human. There is no war like the one you describe." Naren looked up slowly. "That's because we buried it. You expect us to believe your kind wiped out an entire species and then just forgot?" Drumsk's tone was full of disbelief. "No," Naren answered. "We didn't forget. We chose to forget. We made sure of it. Because remembering them gave them power. Even their name was like a seed. A whisper could bring them back. So we erased every part of them, history, code, language, until they became a ghost without a name." A heavy silence followed. Vila stepped closer to the center of the room. "Then why bring it up now?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Why tell us this story if speaking of them is so dangerous?" Naren paused, as if weighing every word carefully. "Because you're walking the same path we did, and you're doing it blind." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal square. It was dull, scratched, and looked like something out of place in the shining room of the council. He placed it gently on the table. "This is all that remains. A piece we never meant to share. Until now." The device hummed quietly, then projected a flickering image into the air above them. At first it was static, lines of white and gray, shaking in midair. Then slowly the image became clearer. A ruined city came into view. Broken buildings, twisted cars, collapsed streets. The sound of wind howled in the background, then movement. Figures moved through the wreckage. Not ships or soldiers, not tanks or machines. Creatures, pale and smooth, with no eyes. Their arms twitched. Their steps were perfectly in sync. They didn't walk like animals or people. They moved like shadows pretending to be real. The council gasped. Someone whispered a prayer. Another backed away from the table. Then the image shifted again. It showed a man sitting on the ground. He was screaming, his face twisted and melted. Skin stretched and shifted until it became someone else. A woman. She smiled and reached for him. The man's scream continued. Naren's voice filled the room, quiet and steady. This was Earth before we reached the stars. Before we joined the council. A war fought in silence. Not with bullets. Not with fire. But with stolen voices and broken trust. Some council members turned away. Others leaned closer, unable to look away. It felt like watching a nightmare come to life. General Dramak's expression had changed. The strength in his voice was gone. What are they? He asked. We called them the Whispers, Naren said. They didn't need armies. They became our family, our leaders, our lovers. They whispered lies until we tore ourselves apart. By the time we realized, half of us were already gone. Viola was pale now. And you erased them? We had no choice, Naren replied. Every record we kept risked waking them again, so we wiped their code from every network. We erased their name from every document. We destroyed their symbols, their language, their memory. We made them disappear. The firelight in the hall flickered as if reacting to his words. Many in the room now looked at each other with new eyes, suspicious, uncertain. You said the Silicarn are doing the same, Vela said quietly. Naren nodded. Yes, and worse. The patterns are there. Lost ships, changed behavior, leaders acting strangely. But you only see the surface. You think war is the answer because that's all you've known. But the truth is already inside your walls. The projection faded. The room grew dim again. No one spoke, not even Dramak. And in that silence, a terrible truth settled over the council. If Naren Voss was right, then war was not only the wrong answer, it might already be too late to stop what had begun. The Ember Hall had never been so quiet. After the recording ended, no one moved. The flames inside the crystal towers flickered as if the air itself was holding its breath. Even those who had cried for war just hours ago now sat in silence, unsure of what they truly believed. For the first time, the threat of the Silicarn felt less like a distant invasion and more like a shadow already creeping through their homes. Naren Voss stood without saying a word. He didn't press them. He knew the images they had just seen would do more than any speech could. The quiet terror in their faces told him they understood. At least some of them did. Among the council members, First Flame Soren was the first to speak. Her voice was calm, but her golden eyes were troubled. These whispers you speak of, they didn't conquer Earth. They infected it. And now you believe the Silicarn are doing the same across the stars? Naren looked at her and nodded slowly. They don't need to win battles. All they need is time. Time to copy, to hide, and to replace. Kelndar, the cyber governor of one of the outer colonies, narrowed his artificial eyes. His voice was low and sharp. If what you say is true, why now? Why show us this after so many years of silence? Because I've seen the signs again, Naren replied. There are missing ships that never send a distress call. There are leaders who vanish and return different. There are files that rewrite themselves. These are not random accidents, these are warnings. Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. A few whispered to their aides. The chamber felt colder now, as if Naren's words had opened a door to something they weren't ready to. Face Soren leaned forward. You say your people erased the whispers from memory. You chose silence instead of war. But was it truly a victory? Naren paused before answering. It was survival. But it came with a price. What kind of price? Asked Keln. Isolation, fear, distrust, Naren said. Even after the war ended, we questioned our neighbors, our own families. The fear never fully left. We became careful, cold. That's why Earth stayed quiet after joining the stars. We watched. We listened. And when the Silicarn came, we recognized the signs others missed. Thorn, still standing near Naren, stepped forward. You've carried this burden alone for too long. Naren met her gaze. It was never ours to carry alone. But no one wanted to listen. Not until now. A faint hum filled the chamber. One of the holographic maps above the central table began to shift. Red marks appeared, places where ships had gone missing. Blue lines connected them in a strange pattern, like threads in a web. Some locations blinked softly, marked confirmed anomaly. Others flashed in warning. Naren tapped a control on his wrist and a new image appeared. It showed a council delegate, an alien diplomat who had once spoken with passion and clarity. In the new footage, the same delegate returned from a mission, looking calm, too calm. His speech patterns had changed. His eyes didn't move the same way. The change was subtle but clear to those paying attention. He was one of the first, Naren said. His planet was attacked. He survived. But he wasn't the same after. His staff noticed. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He repeated phrases exactly the same way. Always the same smile. Always the same voice. Kelndar's face darkened. And you think he was replaced? I know he was, Naren said quietly. Because the real ambassador died during the attack. We found his remains buried under the rubble weeks later. Whoever returned wasn't him. Gasps spread through the hall. This time, no one doubted. Soren stood slowly. Then the Silicarn aren't just among us. They are us. Naren nodded. And the moment you declare war, they will use it. They will push you to fight blindly. And while you fire on your enemies, they'll keep replacing your friends. The firelight seemed dimmer now, as if the shadows had grown deeper in the hall. A heavy weight pressed on the council, not just fear, but responsibility. They had shouted for war without knowing the full truth. Now that truth lay in front of them, cold and undeniable. One voice broke the silence. It belonged to a small envoy from a quiet moon. She stood up, her hands trembling. Our general. He returned from the front lines last week. He looked the same, spoke the same, but yesterday, he didn't remember his own daughter's name. No one laughed. No one doubted her. Another delegate stood. Our systems have been glitching for weeks, files disappearing, orders being reversed. We thought it was sabotage. Maybe it wasn't. The room began to shift, not in chaos but in awareness. They were seeing it now. The signs had been there all along. They just hadn't wanted to see. Naren stepped back from the table. This isn't a war you can win with ships and fire. This is a war of patience, of watching, of knowing when to act and when not to. He didn't ask for power. He didn't demand anything. He only offered understanding. And slowly, the council began to realize the most powerful weapon they had left was not strength or speed. It was knowledge, and a chance to change course before it was too late. The chamber felt colder than it ever had before. The flames in the glass towers still burned, but they no longer offered comfort. Instead, they cast long shadows that reached across the floor of the Ember Hall like the fingers of something waiting in the dark. No one spoke. No one moved. The words of Naren Voss had changed something in the air, something deep and invisible. The council, once a place of pride and power, now sat heavy with doubt. High Warden Relics, who had been one of the first to shout for war, lowered his head. His voice, once filled with fire, was now soft. We thought we were fighting an enemy that feared our strength, but we were only showing them how easily we could be misled. Naren said nothing. He stood quietly at the edge of the central table, his hands at his sides, his eyes calm. He wasn't there to win. He wasn't there to rule. He was there because he had seen what everyone else had missed, what he had once lived through. Soren stepped forward, her golden robes now dull in the flickering light. If they are already among us, then we need to know who. How do we begin to find them? Her voice shook not with fear but with urgency. Naren slowly reached into his coat once more and placed a second object on the table. This time it wasn't a hologram or a recording. It was a black cube, small and unmarked, glowing faintly like a heartbeat. "This is the last piece of Earth's hidden archive," he said. "Inside are the patterns we use to uncover them. Codes, triggers, behavior shifts. It's not perfect, but it's a start." He paused, looking around the room. "But if you use this like a weapon, if you start hunting each other without care, you'll lose more than you'll save. We almost did. In the end, what saved us wasn't this." He nodded toward the cube. It was trust. Fragile, slow trust, and a willingness to stop shouting and start listening. The room remained quiet, but this silence was different. It wasn't fear now, it was focus. The leaders of 42 species were listening, not to power or fear, but to reason. A slow movement came from the far side of the chamber. It was the small envoy who had spoken before, the one whose general had forgotten his daughter's name. She stepped forward and placed her hand over her heart. "We were ready to burn everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now I see. The fire was already inside us. You stopped us, human. Not with threats, not with weapons, just with words." Naren looked at her, and for the first time, he allowed a small, tired smile. "Words are not just wind," he said. "They're memory. They're warning. And sometimes they're all that's left." One by one, other leaders rose. No longer to vote for war, but to share what they had seen. Glitches in systems, strange silences, people who acted almost right, but not quite. What had once seemed random now made sense. The signs had always been there. Kelndar stood with a deep frown. "So we pause," he said. "We investigate. We search, not with suspicion, but with care. We do not march to battle. Not yet." Sorin nodded. "This may be our last chance to understand before we are lost to fear." For the first time in the Council's long history, there was no vote, no pounding fists, no speeches of anger, only a silent agreement. They would not rush into fire, not until they were sure who the real enemy was. Vela Thorne stepped beside Naren. Her eyes were soft, filled with questions, but also with peace. "What will you do now?" she asked. Naren looked at her, then at the hall. "My part is done. I came to show you the path. What you choose next is yours alone." She nodded. "You did more than speak. You made us remember what it means to think." Naren picked up the cube and handed it to a young aide. "Guard this well," he said. "Use it wisely. It is not a weapon, it is a mirror." As he walked out of the Ember Hall, the firelight followed him like a shadow. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Behind him, a room once full of shouting had fallen into quiet work. There were no cheers, no celebration, only thought, and the first steps toward something new. Weeks later, in a quiet archive beneath the Council's central tower, a file was sealed and stored under heavy lock. The title read, "The War That Never Happened." It would not be opened again for many years. But when it was, the final words inside were simple. One voice changed the stars, not by command, but by reminding them how to listen.